So I want also to make my point. I'm looking at this from a social sciences perspective, very from an empirical level. And I kind of want to connect to what the two former speakers have been talking about. But let me first try to give an answer on the basic question that our chair has asked us. So do we see a potential conflict between, on the one hand, privacy, and on the other hand, trustworthiness? Now, I think they don't exclude each other. There shouldn't be a conflict, but it depends on some circumstances, as also been mentioned already a bit by Andreas. Depends to the sense that what are we talking about? We're talking about trustworthiness, which could be explained or defined as worthy of trust. But what kind of trust are we worthy of? And from my angle, it would be public values, public trust. Worthy of public trust means you kind of trust that a system adheres to some, for example, fundamental human rights, like we have in Europe, privacy or privacy. To what extent does indeed the system has incorporated this? Has this been privacy by design within the system? Looking at issues like data minimization or other issues. And if that is the case, then you could say it's worthy of our public trust, the system that we have built. So in that sense, connecting as a sidestep to what just been mentioned, it's indeed about people developing systems. It's not about the technology itself, but it's about the people that designing the systems, and they have incorporated themselves values within that system, being in this case AI. So I think one level of identifying and possibly, very possibly measuring trust is indeed looking to what extent it adheres to some basic human values like privacy, like autonomy, like non-discrimination, and many others that are defined within our general laws within Europe, for example. So that's the first level. Second level, you could say, is looking at to what extent that the interest and the preferences of affected parties, users, but also non-users of these systems, have been harmed or have been made vulnerable in this sense. So this requires you to get into touch with these people to get information, empirical information on the ground about how these systems might have an impact on certain kinds of working conditions, private conditions, interactions between people, and so on. So also gathering this kind of information and having the perspective of different stakeholders, among which users, is very essential to my view. So that's the second level. And third level, which I think is very essential and is often not looked upon, is what you could call contextual purposes or values, meaning depending on the sector or the context in which these systems are implemented, there are different requirements and expectations. Let me give an example. For example, if you implement a system in the education sector, in public education, you kind of expect and require that the system adheres to the kind of norms and values that are important within that sector. When you're looking into public education, this means general access to education, quality of education, Bildung, so not only educating and people in a practical way, but also in educating them as citizens. So different values which are essential in these sectors and contexts need to be taken into account when thinking about incorporating and implementing these systems further on. But it can also happen in other sectors, talking about health, talking about media or energy or other sectors which are important. So from my perspective, looking at these issues, the connection between privacy and trustworthiness depends on the different levels which I'm talked about, meaning public values, fundamental values, human values. Second level, the preferences and interests of affected parties. And third, the kind of contextual purposes and values within different sectors. So making it very context specific in that way. And of course, it's no surprise that I'm looking at it from this perspective, because that's the kind of research as a social scientist we do. We try to gather this kind of information from within sectors, from within communities of people. So that's a kind of my contribution at this moment.